We've been learning throughout the day about the gunman, Omar Mateen. We know Mateen pledged allegiance to ISIS in a 911 phone call made during the attack. He was known to U.S. law enforcement.
He was from Port St. Lucie, Florida, a U.S. citizen, and was 29 years old. Our Josh Elliott is in Orlando and is with Sean Shagani, who is a childhood friend of Mateen.
Vlad, Elaine, thank you both. We are here on the campus of the University of Central Florida in the greater Orlando area, where we are now going to be speaking with Sean Shagani, a longtime friend of Omar Mateen. So first, your thoughts. You woke up, I know, about 9 o'clock this morning. How did you learn of what had happened?
So I woke up, around 9 o'clock. I had a text from my aunt asking if, just making sure I was okay. I said I was. I hadn't heard of anything that had happened, but she mentioned a nightclub shooting. I thought initially she was referencing the one from 2 nights before at the Plaza Live. So I was like, I'm fine. Then I got a text from my mom texting my brother and I saying, like, I know both of you are safe. I know neither of you would be at a nightclub at 2 a.m. I'm in medical school, so obviously I'm not out clubbing late at night. I'm either studying or sleeping. Then I was like, what's going on? And I turned on the TV and I saw the news that there had been a shooting, and at the time there were 20 confirmed deaths, and that people were going to Orlando Regional Medical Center. The victims were, being shuttled by ambulance to Orlando Regional Medical Center. And that was all I had known at the time.
And then you hear the name.
Yes. So I was actually driving to go play tennis with somebody.
When my little cousin, who's also named Sean, called me, and he's like, the shooting in Orlando. I said, yeah, I'm safe. Don't worry about it. I know it's like it's a huge tragedy, but I'm okay. He goes, no, the shooter was Omar. And I immediately knew, the Omar he was referring to, Omar Mateen. And so I said, you're kidding me. He goes, no, the shooter was, Omar. I said, but doesn't he still live like in St. Lucie? He goes, yes, he drove up and he was the one that committed the shooting. And I said, I just said, I can't believe it. And he goes, I obviously wouldn't joke about something like this. So I said, well, I need to call my mom and Josh and let them know, my brother, Josh. So I got off the phone with little Sean, we call him, and I immediately called my mom and Josh and said, the shooter was, little Sean tells me that it's Omar who's done this shooting and who's killed all these people. And my mom, who, in a sense, I guess, helped raise him. He would come over to our house as kids,
So let's go back to when you were kids. Mm-hmm. When did your two families were close? How close, and when did you first meet him?
So I would say when I was in elementary school, we became affiliated with the mosque in Fort Pierce, the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce. So we would go, especially during the month of Ramadan, to pray our evening prayers. And Omar was just another kid among the bunch of Muslim kids who would come and pray, and then we'd eat dinner. And because he was around my age and also my brother's age, who's older than me, we would be the ones that hang out, similar interests, play basketball, play football, after prayers. He was into skateboarding, at one time or another. We would wrestle, things like that. So just normal kid behavior. But because we were friends as kids, we would go over to their house. We knew their sisters as well, and their mom and dad. We spent the night at his house a number of times. He came over and spent the night with us, several times. So just any childhood friendship, going over to each other's houses, playing video games together, playing sports together. It was just a standard childhood friendship relationship.
Was he outgoing? Did he have friends beyond you and your brother, for instance? Because you posted on Facebook today about finding out that it was a childhood friend of yours who has allegedly committed these acts.
Yes.
And you did write of him, he was definitely odd. What did you mean by that?
Right. So, I guess it'd be difficult to classify anybody as normal, but it's just different. I guess everybody's different. Nothing that would strike me as, or my mom and dad who, who would send us over to his parents' house and have him come over to our house, something, that you would identify as violent, or criminal-like behavior. Kind of just like, I guess, a sort of different way of thinking. I'm trying to think of any sort of example, but never expressed any violent behavior or violent thoughts towards me or my brother, or acted out violently towards my brother or me. But, just kind of, a little bit different than everybody else. As far as friends go, I don't believe he had a huge, social, following. But he talked to my brother and I, every day when we were at the mosque. Beyond that, I'm not exactly sure what friends or, who he hung out with. But since we were at the mosque every night together, we hung out, pretty much every night, especially during the month of Ramadan.
Was there a peer group that was purely social in his life? Were there girlfriends?
I don't know. Again, he was, he's 4 years older than me, so he was always in a different, grade level. When I was in middle school, he was in high school, So I don't know about his social group outside of the mosque. We would always just see each other at the mosque. We'd talk to each other, have dinner together, and as a group. With the whole congregation, and then that would be the extent of us hanging out. I never hung out with him with any other social group other than my brother and myself.
Were there guns present in the house or ever discussed?
No. No. His father, his mother, and his 3 sisters. Never, were any sort of advocates for guns. Omar was a security officer and has been in security. I believe he wanted to try to join the police force at one time. I believe he wasn't able to for one reason or another, but he was a security officer. But growing up, no gun magazines, no mention of guns at any time or any point.
You mentioned his father. His father said today, early on, that he didn't think that this shooting was religious in nature. It wasn't a matter of religion. His father said that he believed it was a response to some rather virulent homophobia on the part of Omar, who had seen public displays of affection between homosexuals in Miami specifically. With regard to those, how Omar's father parsed it this morning, what do you make of that?
Again, I don't know much more than what's been put on the news so far. I wasn't obviously there in Miami, so I'm disinclined to deny what his father has said. With regards to Islam, I still am a practicing Muslim. I believe it is a religion of peace, and I can only hope and pray that he didn't have some sick, twisted, interpretation that would lead him to commit this act in the name of our religion. So if what Siddiqui Mateen has said is true, and that is the only reason, I would hope that there's no religious, affiliation with any sort of religious violence as a reason for committing this act.
Was Omar notably homophobic growing up?
We had never expressed any mentions of homophobia or any disdain for homophobia. As kids, it was nothing we would ever, really talk about. Apart from, I guess, childhood banter, calling somebody gay or any, there was never any blatant expression of homophobia from Omar's part.
You mentioned Siddiq Mateen. We've since come to learn some things about Siddiq Mateen. He was hosting a show that was affiliated with a California-based channel that on which he expressed some very strong political views, including notably standing with and supporting the Afghan Taliban. Apparently, he posted to a YouTube channel of his just yesterday a post in which he seemed to be pretending to be the president of Afghanistan and calling for the rounding up of several political figures in the country. What was his father like?
So yes, with regards to what you're referencing, I really don't have much information, with that. And just from my experience with his father, always, a quiet man, always smiling, but, quiet, down to earth, never angry or abusive towards, Omar or his daughters, just always kind, quiet, but, a political activist. I'd never, seen anything or heard anything that would indicate to me that he was, a political activist or, involved with, the Taliban or anything like that. Always just, quiet. My dad, was friends with him at the Fort Pierce Mosque, and he would know more about him than I would, because as I said, the kids, would stick together and play with each other, and then the adults would converse, with among themselves.
What was Omar's relationship like with his father, which is to ask if his father did hold the political views, for instance, I just discussed. Do you think it would be possible that the Omar you knew might have been radicalized by the Sadiq Mateen that you knew?
I don't believe so. I would find it hard to believe, just with my relationship with Sadiq Mateen, as just again a child in the mosque. I don't believe his father was responsible for Omar's way of thinking. I think that Omar himself had some mental issues, clearly, with what's happened. I don't believe his influence by his father would have shaped the events of today.
Omar would later marry, and his ex-wife, while remaining anonymous to this point, did confirm a relationship that began online about 8 years ago. It was a marriage that lasted, according to her and her father, but a few months. There were reports by her and her family of violent behavior, beating by Omar of his now ex-wife. They married in March of 2009. So, first of all, what did you know of this courtship?
So I had heard rumors of Omar, his wife divorcing him because of, I guess, on the grounds of violence or domestic abuse. Around that time, I know this is just speculation, but Omar was a very, I guess, prodigious bodybuilder. Was in the gym a lot, lifting weights. I believe he did confide in me once that he did use steroids to help bulk up or gain more muscle mass. And this would probably be about the time when I was in high school and he was getting married. I don't know if that was the cause for his domestic violence, but it seems pretty consistent, I guess, with the timeline that he would have been taking performance-enhancing drugs or steroids, and also at the time been acting violently towards his wife. And from what I've heard, he had also remarried and has a son later on after this first marriage didn't work out.
Now, a source told the Washington Post that after the breakup of his first marriage, he became intensely more religious. How would you quantify his religious commitments prior to that and what that might have meant?
So it would be hard to quantify how much more religious he would be. The only times I would see him is when I would go to the mosque and he would also go to the mosque. At that age, when we were children, we'd go to each other's houses. When I was in high school and he was after I had graduated high school, we would only see each other at the mosque when he came and when I came. And I can't say that I I don't frequently go to the mosque. But whenever I would go there, he would be there. So it's difficult for me to say that he had become more religious or more devoted to the mosque and religious teachings after his first marriage.
He, according to reports, had pledged allegiance to the Islamic State in a 911 call he made after the shootings had begun. What do you make of
I think it's a tragedy. I think it's a tragedy on both ends, on the victims of the attack, and I think it's also a tragedy for peaceful practitioners of Islam as a faith. I don't believe he even had any foresight in what this would do to his family, what this would do to members of the mosque in terms of potentially facing attacks from people who are scared and don't understand the real ideology of the religion. If he had taken those things into account, I would hope that he wouldn't have even thought about doing something like this. The aftermath of which is going to, cause a lot of hardship for the victims' families, and members of the mosque who are just going to peacefully practice their religion.
You mentioned that he had hoped to join the police force. Do you know why he didn't?
I believe I had heard something about him not being able to pass the exam, the police licensing exam or the academy exam. This would be probably around 2010. I was already in college. I believe he was seeking a position on the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office as a police officer. I believe that clearly didn't pan out, and he became a security officer for the company. I believe is mentioned G4. Ever since I've been in college, I've known him to just be a security guard or security officer for various companies in various places.
Would that have sown the seeds of bitterness that could have grown into what we saw?
I believe it would have made him adept at using firearms. I don't believe it was any sort of seed that would plant, violence in him. As I mentioned before, there's clearly a mental health issue at hand. He was obviously, adept at using firearms and had knowledge of using various firearms that, likely did come from his job as a security officer. But from what I've heard and read, that anybody who dealt with him as a security officer said he was always kind, quiet, helpful, and not disrespectful or violent in any way, shape, or form.
The report that he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, does that square with the Omar Mateen that you knew?
Yes. So every Muslim eventually is required to take a pilgrimage to Mecca, where you fly over to Saudi Arabia, and there's about 7 days of different sort of rituals that you partake in, mainly of which is walking around the Kaaba, or the holy structure that we pray to. But every single Muslim in the world eventually in their lifetime is expected to make this pilgrimage. My dad made it when I was young and came back and was the exact same person. Was it something that you all
discussed?
Well, you discuss when somebody's going on the pilgrimage. It's, I guess, similar to baptism in Christianity, where you're believed to be born again after you do this pilgrimage to Mecca. But as I mentioned before, everybody that I know who has come back has been the exact same person, my father included. I don't believe it would change anybody, especially not into a more violent person.
There are also 2 reports of interviews with the FBI that he had made remarks to his coworkers that had given them pause, made references to knowing the Tsarnaev brothers who were behind the Boston Marathon bombings, that he in fact had been on a surveillance list until the investigation had been completed, at which point his name came off of that list. Would you have any reason to believe that he might have known the Tsarnaev brothers?
I honestly have no information about that. Just from a personal standpoint, I had never, heard that name or known those people prior to. If he says that he did, that's about as far as my knowledge would go. Is if, secondhand you're reporting that, he's reported that he had affiliations with them, but I have no evidence or knowledge of any sort of relationship.
Because on one hand, we hear stories that he was incredibly quiet. In fact, the imam at the Islamic Center in Fort Pierce, when contacted and when it was discovered that Omar was the alleged gunman, said that he was truly the most quiet person who would visit the mosque. You've said similar things. That doesn't seem to square with somebody who in a workplace would be openly discussing things like affiliations with the Tsarnaev brothers. Right.
Again, there's a disconnect there, and I think that stems again from some sort of mental issue or mental disorder that Omar might have had, where he, again, speculation could have, a sort of a manic depressive state where, during any sort of episode of mania could have, expressed extremist sentiments and discussed with coworkers about violence in the name of religion, and then during a, I guess a depressive episode, been very quiet and isolated and
Had
just
he shown
reserved.
evidence of such episodes?
In terms of a manic episode, no. But he always has been, relatively quiet. And again, just from talking with friends and family over the past month, had been increasingly so. Would come in, pray, not talk to anybody, and then just leave right afterwards.
I know you said in your Facebook post today that you were shaking and disgusted as you posted it. What's been the response?
Well, mostly, all my friends and family have been, supportive of me. I do want to stress that, Islam and the way that I've learned and practiced Islam has always been a religion of peace. Dr. Shafiq runs the Fort Pierce Walk-In Clinic. He's the imam at the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce currently. Has never even hinted or expressed any sort of teachings of violence or hatred towards anybody. So it's certainly not coming from the imam of that mosque where this violence is stemming from. Yes, I was disturbed because even though Omar, I haven't talked to him in several years, was never anybody, that I could say for sure would ever commit any sort of act of violence. Yes, he was different, but if I had ever, had any sort of remote, even just any sort of faint knowledge that he would ever commit an act of violence, I would have been the first person to report it.
Final question then. History is going to remember your longtime friend as a monster. Not 24 hours past, removed from what he did. How does that idea sit with you?
Well, part of me wants to hate him. Part of me, has hatred and anger and frustration for any of the mass shootings that we've had throughout U.S. history and just throughout when, I've been alive. Knowing the shooter makes it different because I remember the kid that I was friends with and played with and, prayed with and ate alongside. I in no way want to condone anything that he did. It's deplorable, and I want to be I want to be angry and frustrated, and I want to hate him, and I hate his actions, but it's difficult for me to separate that friendship we had as a child, as children, with the person who committed these acts yesterday.
Sean Shigani,
Thank you.
we appreciate your time today. Let's go back to New York. Vlad, Elaine?